Part 1. The World He Inherited. In the late 1970s, the United States was a nation drifting toward economic chaos. Prices were rising at rates once thought impossible in a developed country. The value of the dollar was collapsing at home and abroad. The American dream felt like it was slipping away, not with a sudden crash, but with a slow suffocation. Families were losing faith. Businesses were cutting back. The engines of the world's most influential economy were grinding, wheezing, and faltering. The nation was still powerful, still wealthy, still proud. But something fundamental had begun to decay. And into this moment walked a quiet, towering figure, reserved, solemn, deliberate. A man who did not seek celebrity and who never cared for the theater of politics. A man who believed that stability, trust, and discipline were not mere economic terms, but the foundation of a society. His name was Paul Adolf Volcker. He would go on to do one of the hardest things any leader has ever done in peacetime America. He would force a nation to endure pain today to secure survival tomorrow. He did not shout, he did not charm, he did not sell slogans. Paul Volcker simply stood firm, and history would remember him as the man who broke inflation and reshaped the American economy for generations. But before he became the quiet titan of American finance, he was something much simpler. A tall, awkward boy from New Jersey growing up in a world that was about to change forever. Paul Volcker was born on September 5, 1927, in Cape May, New Jersey. His father, Paul A. Volcker Sr., was a city manager, a reformer who believed government should serve the public with integrity, competence, and clarity. The elder Volcker was earnest, disciplined, and allergic to corruption or laziness. He kept careful records. He believed in public trust, and he practiced what he preached. This environment shaped the young Paul deeply. He learned early that quiet strength often outlasts loud ambition, that character matters more than ease, that difficult choices are sometimes the only ones worth making. He grew up tall, very tall, eventually reaching 6'7". The height gave him a physical presence that would later feel almost symbolic. A single man standing above the noise of politics, above personalities, above pressure. But when he was young, being tall mostly meant feeling different. He was shy. He was thoughtful. He spoke carefully, often after long pauses, a habit that others would interpret as seriousness, even solemnity. He was not dramatic, not charismatic, but he was focused, and he listened. If Volcker had been born a few decades earlier, his life might have been unremarkable, spent working quietly in local government, like his father. But history had other plans. He came of age during one of the most transformative eras in modern history. World War II was still raging when he entered Princeton University. The war had mobilized entire nations, reshaped economies, and revealed the terrifying power of modern industry. When the war ended, the United States emerged not just victorious, but ascendant, a superpower with unmatched industrial might. Yet with great power came great responsibility. The global economy had collapsed into chaos after World War I. Now, the world was determined not to let that happen again. The question was, could nations coordinate their economic policies to maintain stability? Could money, the very foundation of commerce and society, be managed in a way that avoided disaster? This question led to one of the most important meetings in economic history, the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944. Representatives from 44 nations gathered to design a new international monetary system. And the key decision they made was profound. The US dollar would become the central currency of the global economy, backed by gold. The United States now held the anchor of the world. The value of that anchor, and the trust placed in it, would later rest in the hands of Paul Volcker. After Princeton, Volcker began his career at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He was not yet a policymaker. He was a researcher, a thinker, a listener, but he was already drawn to one idea, that money must be stable for society to flourish. To many people, inflation was just a number, a statistic printed in newspapers. But to Volcker, it was something deeper. Inflation was erosion. It was the silent, invisible decay of trust. When the value of money slips, so does the faith people have in their institutions, in their leaders, in their future. Volcker's early work took him across agencies and departments: the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, the Chase Manhattan Bank. He developed a reputation: quiet, analytical, unwilling to bend under pressure. He was not ideological. He had no interest in theories divorced from reality. He cared about what worked, and he believed deeply that stability was not something to be taken for granted. It had to be protected. By the 1960s, the post-war economic boom was beginning to strain. The United States was spending heavily on social programs, infrastructure, and the Vietnam War. Foreign nations were accumulating US dollars, and some began to wonder whether the US still had enough gold to back them. The mathematical truth was clear: it did not. Confidence in the dollar was beginning to crack, and Paul Volcker would soon be at the center of one of the most consequential decisions in global financial history. In 1969, Volcker was appointed Undersecretary of the Treasury for Monetary Affairs, the nation's highest-ranking economist. He now stood at the crossroads of American financial power. His job was to maintain stability in the global monetary system. At a time when pressure was building from every direction, foreign governments, particularly France, began requesting that the US convert their dollars into gold, as the Bretton Woods system allowed. But each conversion drained America's gold reserves further. The foundation of the world economy was eroding. Volcker knew that something had to change. The old system could not hold. And so, in August 1971, President Richard Nixon made a decision that would transform global finance forever. He suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. The Bretton Woods system collapsed. The world entered a new era, one defined not by fixed gold-backed money, but by floating exchange rates and government-managed currencies. Paul Volcker helped design the transition. He understood the stakes. But with the end of the gold standard came something no one could fully control: inflation. Throughout the 1970s, inflation in the United States spiraled. At first it was subtle, a creeping rise in prices, but soon it became unavoidable. The price of oil quadrupled following geopolitical conflict in the Middle East. Wages rose, prices rose, expectations rose, and inflation became embedded in the psychology of the public. People began to expect that prices would always go up, and that belief became self-fulfilling. By the late 1970s, inflation was nearing 14%. Mortgage rates were skyrocketing. Retirees were watching their savings evaporate. The economy was still growing, but the growth felt hollow, like a structure built on sand. America needed a leader who understood discipline, a leader who could face the fierce political backlash required to stop inflation, a leader who would not be intimidated. And so, in 1979, President Jimmy Carter appointed Paul Volcker as chairman of the Federal Reserve. He entered office at a moment of crisis, and he knew what had to be done, but the cost would be enormous. Part 2. The War Against Inflation. When Paul Volcker took the chair at the Federal Reserve in August 1979, the mood in America was one of exhaustion. For nearly a decade, inflation had gnawed at the country's confidence. People felt trapped in a reality where their money seemed to shrink month by month. Paychecks bought less. Savings melted. Home buyers looked at interest rates that felt surreal, even hostile. The economy was not collapsing, yet it felt as if something essential had fractured. The belief that tomorrow would be better than today. The United States, a nation built on optimism, had begun to wonder if the good years were gone. Volcker stepped into this world with no promises of comfort, no soothing speeches, no easy solutions. He arrived with something else entirely: conviction. He believed that inflation could be broken, but he also knew that doing so would require pain, real pain. and patience. He understood that the American public, Congress, lenders, borrowers, banks, unions, and businesses would all be tested. He understood that political leaders would almost certainly turn against him. He understood that presidents might distance themselves, that newspapers might vilify him, that citizens might curse his name. And he accepted all of that. Because to Paul Volcker, the credibility of a nation's currency was not a matter of convenience. It was a matter of survival. Volcker's strategy was rooted in a simple but powerful belief. Inflation was not merely a number, it was a psychological force. Once people expected prices to rise, those expectations fed the rise. Workers demanded higher pay. Businesses raised prices in anticipation. Consumers bought now rather than later. And so inflation became a self-propelling machine. To stop it, one had to break expectations. To break expectations, one had to demonstrate seriousness. Not with words, with action. Volcker made his move quickly. On October 6, 1979, the Federal Reserve announced a fundamental change to its approach. Instead of targeting interest rates directly, it would target the supply of money in the economy. The message was unmistakable. The Fed would now focus on restraining the growth of the money supply, no matter how high interest rates had to climb in the process. It was a dramatic shift, a declaration of war. Interest rates began to rise almost immediately. From levels already high by historic standards, they surged. First to 12%, then 15%, then higher still. By early 1981, the benchmark interest rate, the rate that influenced mortgages, business loans, and consumer credit, reached 20%. 20%, a number nearly unthinkable today. This was not simply economic tightening, it was a controlled shockwave. The consequences unfolded fast. Home construction collapsed. Cars sat unsold on dealership lots. Farmers found themselves unable to borrow at rates they could survive. Small businesses faced closures. Unemployment climbed sharply. Across the country, people were hurting. Volcker understood the pain. He saw it, he heard it, he read the letters, he attended the hearings, and he did not try to deny it, but he also did not turn back. To reverse course would be to admit that America was unwilling to endure discomfort in order to protect its own future. And Volcker did not believe the country was that weak. The backlash was fierce. Protesters confronted him at events. Home builders mailed him blocks of 2x4s with messages carved into the wood. Farmers drove tractors to the Federal Reserve Building in Washington, circling it like a siege. Unions demanded his resignation. Members of Congress denounced him publicly, yet Volcker remained unmoved. His height, 6'7", contributed to the impression that he stood above the fray, but the real source of his steadiness came from within. He believed that inflation was a threat not just to prosperity, but to the moral foundation of society. If prices could not be trusted, neither could promises, neither could institutions, neither could the future. To Volcker, this was not merely economics, it was responsibility, and he was willing to be hated for it. By 1982, the suffering was undeniable. Unemployment had reached levels not seen since the Great Depression. Entire industries were contracting. Newspapers ran stories of despair, confusion, and frustration. Politicians, sensing public anger, pressured the White House to intervene. But one crucial fact stood between Volcker and political dismissal: support from President Ronald Reagan. Reagan, like Volcker, believed inflation was a threat to American stability. Though the two men differed in ideology and temperament, Reagan, optimistic and theatrical, Volcker, reserved and deliberate, they shared a willingness to endure short-term hardship for long-term stability. Reagan resisted calls to fire Volcker, and Volcker continued the fight. The pressure mounted, but the data slowly began to shift. Inflation, once roaring at more than 13%, began to fall. First to single digits, then lower still. By 1983, inflation had collapsed to roughly 3%. It was one of the most dramatic economic turnarounds in modern history. And it had come not through luck, nor happenstance, nor political spin, but through deliberate, painful, disciplined policy. Volcker had broken inflation, and in doing so, he restored something much deeper: trust in the American dollar. The aftermath was profound. With inflation defeated, the economy began to grow with new force. Investment surged, confidence returned, businesses expanded, stocks advanced. Confidence in the American economic model revived not only at home, but across the world. The dollar, once doubted, resumed its place as the anchor of global finance. But the victory came at a cost. Manufacturing jobs lost during the recession never fully returned. Small towns across the Midwest and South experienced long-term decline. The shift toward a service-based and financialized economy accelerated. Some would later praise Volcker as a savior. Others would criticize him as a destroyer of industrial America. Both perspectives contained truth. Volcker's policy saved the economy, but it also reshaped it. The America that emerged after the inflation war was not the America that had entered it. Paul Volcker knew this. He understood that history never gives clean solutions, only trade-offs. But he also believed, firmly, that the alternative to his actions would have been far worse. A nation where inflation ran unchecked was a nation where institutions would lose legitimacy, where the currency could not be trusted, where economic planning became impossible, where the future became uncertain. He believed that such a nation could not endure, so he held the line, even when the country cursed his name, even when the pain was at its peak, even when he stood almost alone. He did not choose the easy path, he chose the necessary one, and in doing so, he preserved the foundation of American economic power. Part 3. Legacy of a Quiet Giant. In the mid-1980s, as inflation fell and the American economy steadied, Paul Volcker found himself in an unusual position. The man who had once been cursed, protested, and publicly denounced was now being credited with saving the nation from economic decay. Journalists who once wrote angry editorials now wrote tributes. Politicians who had attacked him now praised his courage. The public, slowly, came to understand the magnitude of what had been done. But Paul Volcker was unmoved by applause. He did not seek celebration. He did not enjoy the spotlight. He did not view his work as heroism. To him, it was simply what the moment required. He continued leading the Federal Reserve until 1987, maintaining a steady hand even as new financial challenges emerged. Stock markets surged, new financial instruments proliferated, and Wall Street's influence on the economy began to grow. A new era of finance was awakening: fast, aggressive, profit-driven, global. Volcker saw both the potential and the danger. Where others saw efficiency and innovation, he also saw excess, speculation, and fragility. He believed finance should serve the real economy, not dominate it. Money, in his view, was a tool, not a prize. As the markets swelled with leverage and ambition, Volcker grew uneasy. He warned that when financial systems become too complex, too opaque, and too powerful, they risk turning from engines of prosperity into engines of instability. The warnings went mostly unheeded. The age of deregulation was beginning. Volcker stepped down as Federal Reserve Chair in August 1987. He left quietly, without fanfare. But the world he left behind was forever changed. Inflation had been tamed. Trust in the dollar had been restored. The United States stood once again as the anchor of the global economy. Yet the seeds of future crisis had already begun to take root. For the next 2 decades, Volcker watched from the outside as the financial sector grew faster and larger than any other part of the economy. Hedge funds expanded. Investment banks merged into global giants. Debt levels climbed. Risk became normalized. Bubbles formed and burst, from dot-com stocks to housing markets, And then, in 2008, the global financial system came to the edge of collapse. Banks failed, credit froze, markets plunged, the world economy staggered, and once again, the United States faced a crisis not of war or diplomacy, but of trust. Trust in its money, its institutions, its leadership. During those chaotic days, political leaders and journalists sought guidance from familiar voices, and one voice rose above them all, calm, measured, unmistakable. Paul Volcker. He advised restraint where others panicked. He urged reform where others sought quick fixes. And he warned that the financial system must never again become so large, so complex, and so unconstrained that it could threaten the stability of an entire nation. His recommendations led to what became known as the Volcker Rule, a policy limiting speculative trading by commercial banks. It was a simple principle rooted in a lifetime of experience. Banks should serve society, not gamble with its future. The rule did not restore the old world. It did not erase the changes that had come, but it reminded the country that discipline and responsibility remain essential, no matter how wealthy, advanced, or powerful a nation becomes. In his later years, Volcker wrote, taught, advised, and reflected. He did not speak loudly, but he spoke clearly. He believed that trust is the foundation of any society. Trust in money, trust in institutions, trust in leadership. Without trust, nothing holds. Not economies, not governments, not nations. Paul Volcker died on December 8, 2019, at the age of 92. His passing marked the end of an era, the era of leaders who believed that integrity meant standing firm even when the world pushes back. He never sought fame, he never sought wealth, he lived simply, he worked relentlessly, he cared deeply about the public good. He was not a politician, not a celebrity, not a performer. He was something far rarer, a steward of responsibility, a guardian of stability, a quiet titan. When the history of the 20th century is written, many names will appear. Politicians who promised, businessmen who built, generals who led, entertainers who inspired, but few shaped the daily lives of millions as profoundly and as quietly as Paul Volcker. He did not ask to be liked. He did not ask to be admired. He asked only that the truth be faced and that the difficult path be taken when it is the right one. His legacy endures not in statues or slogans, but in something far more fundamental: the value of the dollar, the stability of the economy, the belief that institutions can still act with courage. When a nation forgets what discipline costs, it can look to Paul Volcker. And remember,